Howdy, Aztecs. Coming to you with chapter 14, Infection, Infectious Diseases, and Epidemiology. Okay, so, oh, look at this. This is a photograph of mutualism. So, I don't know if I've never really seen termites except in photographs. So, these are termites, and living in their gut is this protozoan called trichonympha, and it is the thing that digests the wood. So the termites eat the wood, and the protozoan trichonympha digests the wood. So that's an example of mutualism. So let's talk about these different types of symbiotic relationships between a microbe and the host that they live in. So symbiosis is a general term, means to live together. You've probably heard the term before. But the symbiosis it's not a single definition. It's actually a continuum from beneficial to both members in the symbiotic relationship to damaging to one of the members in the symbiotic relationship. So there's three types of symbiotic relationships. There's mutualism, which we just saw in this photograph. There's commensalism, and then there's parasitism. So mutualism, like in the photograph, both of the members benefit. So the termites and the protozoan both benefit from this mutualistic relationship. Another example, bacteria in your colon get a warm, moist, nutrient-rich environment, and from that we get vitamin precursors from those bacteria. In a mutualistic relationship, sometimes one or both cannot live without the other. Sometimes they can live without the other in a mutualistic relationship. This is just a table from your book, table 14.1, the three types of symbiotic relationships. So we talked about that: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. So the second type of symbiotic relationship is called commensalism. That's where one member of the relationship benefits and the other is unaffected. So for example, Staphylococcus epidermidis grows on our skin, so it benefits from growing on our skin, but we're unaffected by it. It doesn't cause any harm to us. And then the third type of symbiotic relationship is parasitism. And in that relationship, the parasitic member derives benefit from the other member, which is usually the host, but the host member gets harmed in a parasitic symbiotic relationship. It may be just a little bit of harm, or it may kill the host. All right, so let's look at some of the normal or resident microbiota, aka flora, on and in hosts. So if we look at this table from your book, 14.2, some resident microbiota. So in the upper respiratory tract, these guys are normal and they live on you. All these different, in all these structures in your upper respiratory tract. So your trachea, your major bronchi, your nose, mouth, and your epiglottis. And they include Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, and Candida fungus. They're normal resident microbiota. In your upper digestive tract that include all these organs would include, see some, Neisseria, Staphylococcus again, Treponema, remember Treponema pallidum causes syphilis, and some protozoans, Entamoeba and Trichomonas are normal resident microbiota in your upper digestive tract. In your lower digestive tract, you have some Bacteroides, Clostridium, Proteus, Shigella, etc. And then you can look at the normal or resident microbiota in the female and male urinary tracts, and then in your eyes and your skin. So normal or resident microbiota in the host. So you are the host. So parts of your body have millions of mutualistic and commensal symbionts. Those are symbiotic organisms. They're called symbionts. So you have millions of those. And they're your normal microbiota, aka flora. So there's two types of normal microbiota. So the resident microbiota, the resident normal microbiota that live on your skin all the time, and then the normal but transient microbiota. Okay. So resident microbiota remain on you for life. So here's some transmission electron micrograph of some normal bacteria in your nasal cavity. So these are just colorized bacteria. And then this is the epithelium of your nasal cavity. So resident microbiota remain for life. You can find them on your skin, your mucous membranes, digestive tract, upper respiratory tract, all those places on your body that we looked at on the last slide. And they usually do no harm. Transient microbiota would remain in or on your body for only a short time because they're transients. Maybe their transition or their transientness is a few hours, could be a few days, months, and you often just pick them up by contacting them, and they're on you, and then they're off you within a few hours or days, etc. E. coli on your hands is transient on your skin. Transient microbes cannot persist because of other resident microbes that are on your body. How do you acquire your normal microbiota? So in this kind of artist conception, so the fetus is moving toward the birth canal. You can see its head has pushed past the cervix and is ready to go into the vagina and out into the world. Woohoo! And before that, they were living in this sterile, it's cut here, but this sterile amniotic sac in the uterus. So that once the amniotic fluid, or the sac breaks, water comes out, the head pushes through the cervix and the vaginal canal, you get colonized by your first normal or resident microbiota. So you get them right when you're born. Woohoo! Thanks, Mom. And they're not only on your skin, but they'll enter your nose and mouth while you're in the birth canal. And we've talked about this a couple times. Staphylococcus epidermidis is just an example of a resident microbe on your skin. So this slide is entitled Pathogenic Microbiota in Hosts. And then you can break those into two categories. So pathogenic microbiota in a host could include or could be a strict pathogen versus an opportunistic pathogen. So strict pathogens are more virulent, can cause disease in a normal person. Opportunistic pathogens, they're typically members of the normal flora and cause disease only when they are introduced into an unprotected site. And opportunistic pathogens usually take advantage of people with underlying health conditions. So in this cartoon, so here's the teeter-totter or the balance. We've got a potential pathogen over here with its virulence factors. And then we've got the physiological state of the host. So nutrients, energy, the defense system, all working pretty well. So it says that or the cartoon shows that there's a balance between the potential pathogens and the host, because the host is healthy. And in the second cartoon, disease can result when the host has weakened defenses, so the immune system is weak, and impaired physiology, maybe some lung disease. The balance tips in favor of the pathogen and you have a disease. You could also have a host over here in this third part of the cartoon that has normal defenses, but this pathogen is so virulent with its virulence factors, the balance gets tipped toward disease. So if you are a strict pathogen, you always cause an infectious disease. Examples of strict pathogens are influenza, the pathogens that cause, the virus that causes influenza, tuberculosis, so Mycobacterium tuberculosis is a strict pathogen, and the rabies virus. They're all examples of strict pathogens. So under ordinary circumstances, the resident microbiota don't cause disease, but normal microbiota may become opportunistic pathways. We just showed the cartoon, but let's put some words to that. Under the following conditions. So you're a normal microbe, but you could become an opportunistic pathogen if the host that you're living on is immune suppressed. So for example, immunocompromised host. So maybe if they're undergoing radiation or chemotherapy for cancer, they would be immunocompromised. What's another way? If you are a normal microbe, you become a opportunistic pathogen. You could change the relative abundance of normal microbiota. So if you use antibiotics, you could kill the normal microbiota. For example, in the women who take antibiotics, so you kill a certain percentage of the normal microbiota in the vagina. That means the yeast that were growing there normally, but in check, will overgrow, and then in that sense they will become pathogenic and cause a disease. Normal microbiota, they usually are using nutrients, they're taking up space, they're releasing toxic waste that are not toxic to you, but toxic to other microbes that want to live in the same space they live in. So when the normal microbiota are doing this, they're taking up space and nutrients, it decreases the likelihood that a pathogen can become established in that space. And this is called microbial antagonism. It's also known as microbial competition. So the good microbes are there battling the bad microbes. So let the good microbes live where they live. Some examples, you have the bacterium Staphylococcus aureus. It's usually found in the nasal cavity of healthy people. But if it gets inhaled into the lungs, it can cause pneumonia. Staph aureus is best described then as both a resident microbe, and then it can also be an opportunistic pathogen if it gets from your nasal cavity into your lungs. You could, the third way that a normal microbe could become an opportunistic pathogen is you could introduce that normal microbe into an unusual site where it doesn't belong. You could be a displaced resident. So, for example, here's the rectum and the anal canal, anal opening. E. coli from the colon, so these are parts of your colon. Here's the rectum, here's the anal canal. So the E. coli that lives in there may enter the urethra and cause a urinary tract infection. Or if there's access to blood, your blood stream, then the E. coli that lives in your colon could get into your blood and cause bacteremia. E. coli O157H7 will represent a transformed resident. So if you're a resident in general, you can cause an opportunistic infection if they enter tissue they do not belong in. So, for example, you could have some residence on your skin, and if the catheter tip touches your skin, and then you could introduce some of those some of those resident microbes into your bladder through a catheter. Now that once normal resident is an opportunistic pathogen in your bladder. And then also just resident flora can become opportunistic pathogens if the patient is unhealthy. So this is one of those word charts for opportunistic infections, and it shows all these types of opportunistic infections like candidiasis, toxoplasmosis, salmonellosis, histoplasmosis. Here's one, pneumonia. Heard of that one. So all these different infections happen as a result of opportunistic pathogens. So all of the following contribute to opportunistic infections. So if you are immunocompromised, you could get an opportunistic infection. If you participate in very risky behaviors, you can get an opportunistic infection. If your resident microbes gain entry to tissues where they don't belong, you can get an opportunistic infection. All right, so this is a cartoon of the infection chain. So it's kind of complicated, but you can see the cool chain links back here. And then it shows infectious agents, a susceptible host, all participate in the infection chain. Portals of entry, so for example, your nasal cavity and coronavirus participates in the chain of infection. These things called reservoirs that harbor pathogens. We'll talk about those. Portals of entry, you also have portals of exit. So for example, your sweat glands. And then modes of transmission. How are you transmitting infectious agents? And then, so those are the main objects in the circle. And then you can see on the outside, for example, you can use sanitation, disinfection, and sterilization to battle the infectious agents. You can use hand washing to stay safe from these reservoirs that contain your infectious agent of interest, including us. We are reservoirs. You can use sterile techniques and masks to guard yourself from portals of exit of pathogens. So for example, when someone sneezes or they have a coronavirus, portal of exit is your nasal cavity in your mouth, and you can protect yourself when you wear a mask. You can also protect yourself from transmitting the infectious agent of interest using personalized protective equipment, or PPE. Everybody's heard of that. So for example, protozoa, fungi, viruses, bacteria, they're all infectious or causative agents in the infection chain. And in this cartoon, it actually lists prions. But for your exam, we'll just talk about protozoa, fungi, viruses, and bacteria. For example, the reservoirs, water, soil, animals, including us as human animals, are all reservoirs in the infection chain. So if we want to get infected, we could go to those reservoirs and pick up an infection. In the transmission, modes of transmission, droplets, vehicles, not motor vehicles, but we'll talk about what vehicles are, vectors, and making contact are all means of transmission in the infection chain. And then we'll do more on transmission, the modes of transmission, in part 3 of chapter 14 videos. Okay, how do you break the infection chain? You can vaccinate, you can disinfect, you can use sanitation procedures, take universal precautions, wear PPE, change your gloves, wash your hands, dispose of waste properly, cook food to the right temperature, social distancing, and then educating the public. And we're all going through that right now with coronavirus. So this is how you can break the infection chain. And let's look over here at our check marks, more check marks. Ebola virus and coronaviruses are thought to be spread from bats to human. So the bat then would be an example of a reservoir in this infection chain. So here's animals. So that animal here would be a bat. Periodontitis, a periodontist works on your teeth, but periodontitis is a gum disease, and it's associated with a lot of different bacteria, including Treponema denticola, which is the causative or infectious agent. So up here, it's a bacteria in that infection chain, causing the infection in tissues surrounding your teeth, the gum tissue surrounding your teeth. All right, there's reservoirs of infectious diseases of humans. There's 3 types. And we're going to look at this table to talk about the 3 types of reservoirs. So reservoirs are sites where a disease-causing pathogen is maintained as the source of infection. So a reservoir, your pathogen of interest will live there and stay there, and you can go to that reservoir and get that disease anytime you want. So for example, the first type of reservoir is an animal reservoir. So we come over here and we see in our table, here's an animal reservoir. And animal reservoirs include dogs, sheep, cattle, monkeys, cats, and other animals, including ourselves. So within an animal reservoir, if you are a disease that spreads from animal hosts in animal reservoirs to humans, then the disease is a zoonosis. So this includes rabies, bubonic plague, anthrax. There's over 150 known zoonoses or zoonotic diseases that spread from non-human animal hosts in an animal reservoir to us. So here's a table of some common zoonoses. So here's the disease. So it could be a helminthic zoonosis. So the helminth lives in a reservoir and it causes diseases in us. And the disease name could be a tapeworm infestation. Other diseases, you could have a protozoan disease, including malaria, a fungal disease, including ringworm, and then these bacterial and viral diseases. But if you are a disease and you spread from an animal host in an animal reservoir to a human, then you are a zoonosis. Okay. All right, number 2, human reservoirs. Remember, we're animals. So this is looks like a photograph of a ad or something in an old-timey newspaper of Typhoid Mary. So you've probably heard of her, Typhoid Mary Malone. She was a cook, and she would go from house to house and to build to like a restaurant to restaurant, and she had salmonella bacteria in her body, but she didn't get sick. So she never got infected, but it was living on her. And so anytime she made anyone food, they would get typhoid fever. And here she's cracking some little skeleton heads in the pan of the food that she's going to cook for you. So the reservoir is Mary. She's a human reservoir. And she's also a carrier, so she's carrying salmonella bacteria. So if you are sick, you are a reservoir of infection. But you don't always get sick. Like I said, typhoid Mary, she never got infected, but she's still carrying the disease, carrying the bacteria that causes the disease. So we've talked about this. Humans can be examples of reservoirs in the infection chain. People, if you are in the asymptomatic incubation stage of a disease, you could be the reservoir of a causative agent. So, and this is just the asymptomatic stage. Now, you could still go on to get sick, but in the beginning, you're asymptomatic, so you don't know if you're sick or not. But you could be a reservoir. So for coronavirus, if you're carrying it, you are a human reservoir for the causative agent of COVID-19. Oh, this cartoon, this guy, I don't know if it's this guy, but one of these guys, they were building these, they were laying pipes in England, and one of these guys, the workers, just would go to the bathroom, take a leak in the pipes, and he didn't know he was sick. He was an asymptomatic carrier of Salmonella enterica. That's the bacterium that causes typhoid fever. He just would urinate anytime he wanted to, and he contaminated the town's water supply. 43 people died from him just taking a leak on the job. All right, more reservoirs of infectious disease. These are non-living reservoirs. So let's check out this cartoon. Let's start at the top. So first of all, here's some factory blowing some toxic waste. Here's a patch of something that was planted, and the water runoff goes into the stream. Now, whoever planted this stuff, they could have urinated on these crops, and then the runoff from the crops go into this major stream. Now check out this guy. I think it's a goat, but check out what he does. Does a little feces, a little urine, gets into our stream of interest. Here's a little kid, a little feces, a little urine, getting into our stream of interest. Here's a dog, little feces, a little urine going into this, where this guy looks like he's going to get some water from. Hope he doesn't drink it. And then this little gal, she's going to get some water to, I don't know, make dinner or just drink it. It's not good. Here's a mom. She's got a baby. Here's a diaper with feces on it. She's going to wash that in our water source of interest. And then here's a little guy playing in it. And this is just a bad situation. So look, it starts all nice and blue. The water of interest starts all nice and blue. And then it gets all kind of fecal colored down here. So non-living reservoirs can be the soil, can be water, can be food. Oh yeah, so here's an apple core. This could be a non-living reservoir if someone who was sick ate that apple. So soil could be fecally contaminated with Clostridium bacteria, and then from that you can get botulism, tetanus, and gangrene. Water may be fecally contaminated or contaminated with urine. From that you could get parasitic worm eggs, you could get protozoa, bacteria, and viruses. Food can be a non-living reservoir. So meats, vegetables, and milk that are not pasteurized or cooked well could be a non-living reservoir of microbes. Okay, so that was it on reservoirs. Movement of microbes into hosts. Let's look at contamination and infection, these terms. So contamination just means you have the presence of microbes on your body. So you're contaminated. So, and they can come via food, drink, air, wounds, sexual intercourse. Some contaminants are harmless. Some contaminants are transient. Now, if you've got, so let's say you're contaminated with a harmless contaminant. What happens when you get infected? So that's when the pathogen actually invades your body. So when you have enough of these, they were transient contaminants, but now they have overcome your body's defenses. Now they're pathogenic contaminants. They multiply, they become established in the body. You may be infected at this point, but you might not have the disease, like this guy. He was infected, it was in his body, he was urinating out the pathogen, but he did not have the disease. He didn't know he was sick. Disease is the term that applies when the presence of a pathogen results in damage to the host. And then remember earlier we talked about strict pathogens. An example would be Bacillus anthracis that causes the disease anthrax. Because it's a strict pathogen, it will always cause a disease in humans. Okay, so let's look at portals of entry. So all of these are portals of entry. So you have cut, an insect bite, your anus is portal of entry. Ear, conjunctive of your eye, your nose, your mouth. The placenta is a portal of entry. The vagina in females and males, it's a penis. The urethra is a portal of entry. All places you could, potentially have a microbe enter. So let's take a look at the skin. The skin, its outer layer, so the epidermis here, the outer layer is composed of thick, dry, tightly packed, dead cells. Epidermis is a good barrier to most microbes, but pathogens can still get in. They can get in here through a hair follicle. So you're a pathogen out here and you go, oh, look, there's a little portal of entry. Crawl down this hair follicle and then I can get into the bloodstream. Or a sweat gland. So here's the pore of a sweat duct. So here's the pore of a sweat duct, here's the sweat duct, here's the sweat gland. It doesn't show up, but it's enmeshed with capillaries. So if you're a smart microbe, you can get into the capillaries and you're in the bloodstream. And this says that abrasions, cuts, bites, scrapes, stab wounds. I don't know where. This is from your book. Like, these all seem kind of hard. You get cuts and bites, and all of a sudden, boom, stab wounds, burrowing larvae of a parasitic worm. They all open your skin to infection. And also, some fungi can digest those dead skin cells in the epidermis to get to the moister layers, which is the dermis, which is where all the capillaries are. And if you can get a capillary, then you get into the bloodstream. Mucous membranes include the respiratory tract, GI, urinary, reproductive tract, and the conjunctiva of your eye. They're all mucous membranes. So that's portal of entry. The most frequent portal of entry in your body, in the human body, is the respiratory tract. And guess what the portal of entry for coronavirus is? The respiratory tract. How about the placenta or the transplacental route as a portal of entry? So in 2% of pregnancies, pathogens cross the placenta into the embryo. But that means in 98% of pregnancies, that does not happen. And then you have this route. It's kind of weird how to describe this, but it's not a typical portal of entry. But it's a way that if you are a microbe, you can circumvent or get around all these portal of entries that might not be available to you. And the way you can get in to the body via the parenteral route. So if you get a tattoo or IV drug use, you can introduce the pathogen through the penetration of blood vessels.